Lax is snapping it to a Slim Jim right now. Oh, yeah. Snap it to a Slim Jim.
I'm feeling frisky.
You're feeling frisky. Oh, yeah.
I mean, I never loved, like, pro wrestling or whatever, but, like, Macho Randy Savage was the best. That character just is so off the wall. It's so entertaining to watch those old clips of him, like, talking to the reporter or, like, having a showdown with Hulk Hogan.
Yeah. Bring your mic a little closer. Just a little closer.
Yeah. It's just like the amount of cocaine they're both on.
100%.
It's just like so entertaining.
Oh, yeah. For some reason, I love these ribbons. I had to work on my Macho Man. Yeah. I can only do the, oh, yeah. I'm coming for you. That was a little bit better.
The cream rises to the top.
That's what he says?
Yeah.
The cream rises to the top. Brother. Oh, yeah. No? All right. Did you ever see, what was it? It was the black wrestler back in the day, like same time as those guys. His name was like, it's like Brooklyn Rap, like, or something. Like, it was very, stereotypical because it's wrestling or whatever. Am I too hot for you guys?
No, you're good.
Compared to you guys?
Yeah,
okay.
you're fine.
All right. Then I'll take my clothes off and we'll see what happens. So no, but it was I want to say it was like Harlem Williams.
Was it Booker T?
Yeah. It's like, come on, man. Like, because there was a Booker. Yeah. Anyway, everyone knows. No, but he fucking drops an N-bomb during one of those like promo, like a live promo video.
Yeah.
I seen it, and it's so funny because he's supposed to keep saying like "sucker," right? So he's like, "I'm coming for you, sucker, sucker, I'm coming for you," and then just drops an N-bomb about Hulk Hogan, and you see him immediately take 3 steps behind the other wrestlers and just start grabbing his eyes like, God damn it, I fucked up.
He's like, we all can say this.
Yeah, the next wrestler's like,
Hulk Hogan's like, oh man, I've been saying that for a while. So,
Hulk Hogan's like, I only say that during sex, so I only say that in bed. My weird little shriveled up testosterone balls. Hey, I would be nicer to him if he wasn't apparently a keynote speaker at the Republican
I
Convention.
love that he's done that like born again like turn really hard.
I don't care one way or the other. I don't spare him a lot of thought.
Yeah, that's fair.
He doesn't seem
deserve
seem worth it.
It is funny though. I mean, it's just he's a parody of himself as a born again Christian.
Well,
Jesus is my brother.
Yeah.
Jesus is somewhere going, no, not really. No.
Yeah.
What you gonna do when the Jesus comes back for you?
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like hitting your head against canvas thousands of times over your career does stuff to you. Which
you might be showing signs of CTE. We don't know.
Every once in a while it works out good. Like, for instance, Jesse the Body Ventura, kind of rad, in my opinion. A little bit rad. Maybe there's something I don't know about him that's like, problematic or whatever, but he like straight up is just like, he's a good dude. He's straight up just like, we should have socialized medicine and also chemtrails.
He tried to unionize the pro wrestlers.
Yeah.
And then Hulk Hogan was the fucking
rat him out
to like McMahon or something.
I do
fucking scab.
My favorite Jesse Ventura thing is that he was governor of Minnesota.
Yeah.
And while he was governor at the time there was a Confederate flag in the Minnesota State Capitol building that had been captured by the 1st Minnesota at Gettysburg. At Gettysburg, the 1st Minnesota took a Virginia regiment's battle flag, and while he was governor, whoever was the governor of Virginia at the time was like, hey, could we have it back? Because it was, it's been like 150 years. Like, can we have it back? And he goes, no, we can't. We took it. It's ours now.
Yeah, it's like, fuck you.
And that flag is no longer in the Minnesota Capitol. It's now in the historical society.
Okay.
Right? They moved it into the historical society. Nice. So it's more of an exhibit than a as much as it makes like the gremlin part of my brain super happy that like a Yankee state took a Confederate flag and like plastered it up and was like, hey, here we are. Yeah. There's another part of my brain that's like, that isn't helpful. Like, it isn't helpful. We don't need to keep rubbing their nose in it necessarily. At a certain point.
Okay, but all the like lost cause, like neo-Confederates,
I'm not saying no. I agree.
Who won't even let it go.
Yeah, I mean that's you're not wrong. There's lots of people who need to let it go, but it doesn't help. You're giving the lost causers ammunition by doing that kind of thing.
I mean they're gonna find it one way or another. I agree,
but you gotta eventually you get things like Mississippi change their state flag. I really like the new Mississippi state flag.
I haven't seen it.
I mean. Considering it's competition, it's hard not to like.
I mean, that's true, but like sometimes
it's like I really like the guy who took over for Savile. You know what I mean? Like a lot better than the last guy who did Jimmy Savile. Anyway,
well, I mean, I think part of it is that one of the things that does frustrate me about more than half of the U.S. state flags is that you can't tell them apart at more than 50 feet distance.
Right.
Like if I put the Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Virginia state flags next to each other, the only way you can tell them apart is to see the words Minnesota, Virginia, or Minnesota on them because they're all
that generic.
Well, they're blue flags with the coat of arms and then the name of the state, and that's it.
And like a dude in the middle.
Yeah,
don't they all have a dude in the middle?
Whatever the state, whatever like Virginia's is a woman. It's liberty crushing a tyrant, right? But it's the state seal. With the Sic Semper Tyrannis underneath.
Drenched in irony.
I did want to say
their history.
I did want to say that apparently we don't agree with the Historical Society like state flag thing because when you said they asked for their flag back, I would have just sent them a white one. Like not say anything. Just be like, here you go. Oh, is that how you meant? Oh, our bad. Us Minnesotans, we just don't know.
We do passive aggression
real well.
Yeah. Here's a flag with my ass on it. You can kiss it.
Yeah.
That's more Maryland. Minnesota be like, oh, we're so sorry. We really thought that was the right one.
Right.
We'll send you a real nice casserole, real nice hot dish next time. We're so sorry.
It's a fucking casserole with like the Confederate flag in like different colored potatoes on the front. It's like red and anyway.
It was like, oh. Did they say, oh?
Yeah, there's a lot of, we're going to just sneak by you real quick there.
Sorry to bother you, but I got to go to the bathroom. I'm going to have explosive diarrhea. Thank you. It's, can I help you with the door first, though?
It's all the lactose.
Yeah.
Too much cheese.
So even though the poop is literally streaming down my leg right now, is there something I can help you with before I go poop? That'd be pretty great. Just trying to do my part, Do
you need your driveway shovel? I probably can hold it another 20 minutes.
Yeah. Long enough to shovel a driveway after 2 feet of snow. I mean,
I'm not a savage or anything.
Yeah. I'm not a goddamn fib.
Yeah, what am I, from California? Well, California over there? No one says California more ridiculously than a Midwesterner. Like, California?
Yeah, it comes out as like 7 syllables.
Yes. Actually, there is one group of people who says California more ridiculously than Midwesterners.
Is it California?
Yes. California? You guys, ever since I moved to California, I've just had so much fun. It's like, Trevor, you are from Ohio. You moved 3 weeks ago. What the fuck?
How did you pick up that accent that fast?
I work in a weed dispensary, so it's been pretty cool. Pretty great. What's the East Coast accent? What's the like, not New York, because that, like, the New York
like the Mid-Atlantic?
Yeah.
Hey, welcome to the paper. We're or like the radio voice.
You're thinking
hey, well, how about them Yankees?
Well, we've got this new ship called the Lusitania, and we can't wait to see how it goes. Now to some jazz. It's breaking news. Turns out things didn't go that well for the Lusitania. All right, more jazz.
That's one of them, but the other one is to have that same accent, but you need to slow it down so much because you just can't really be bothered. Actually,
this is great.
I'm up from Boston, and I was going yachting last weekend with Muffy, and And it's not a yacht unless it's 120 feet gunnel to gunnel. And they were parked everywhere.
I mean, if you do like New England, like Boston. Like,
well, we shouldn't have let those people into the country.
That's a good country.
They're not quite us, if you know what I mean. That's mostly Catholic. It's real gross.
Not one of those families have ever sent their older sister to an asylum for being a lesbian. That's not how it goes. Wear your boat shoes. We're going to the yacht club. We're going to the yacht club.
No, I actually, that voice is...
Come along, Reginald. And that's whoever serves them is Reginald.
But the reason I know that accent is there's a series. There was a documentary series where every episode was on a different decade of the 20th century, and the one for the 1920s, and they were all made in the 1990s. And so they're in the 20s. They're interviewing people from the 1920s.
Okay.
And there's this brother and sister who are.
Fucking.
Plot twist.
Who are extremely wealthy. And they have this accent where they sound pleasant, but when you actually listen to the words, you want to punch them in the face as hard as you can. Because the sister's like, we had maids everywhere. You have a chambermaid and a parlor maid and a kitchen maid. And she's like, how many is that? Well, at least 7. And then the brother's like, everyone was in the market. The baker, the candlestick maker, they were all... My chauffeur was in the market, and if he could be in the market, then anyone could.
Oh my God.
You're like, like you want to punch them in the face really hard.
Yeah.
And,
really hard.
Yeah, really hard.
Let me come here and let me punch you in the face real hard. All right. Show you how we do it in Southie. I don't do a good Boston accent. I have to watch Good Will Hunting 15 more times, and then it was...
Yeah, probably.
You're just a kid. Remember, you're just a kid. You've never laid in a girl's lap, known what it's like to be truly in love.
Is that Christopher Walken?
Oh. No. Does Christopher Walken have Boston accent? It's hard to tell. That
sounds like someone's grabbing Christopher Walken's balls. Oh my God! What are you doing?
There's been a Hollywood producer on my balls since 1967, when I had my first role as an abuse victim. An abuse victim. He hit me.
We're really getting a range of accents today. We're really practicing our voices.
Hey.
Well, so this bodes well.
Please don't take those candles away from my scrotum. Burns too much. I don't know. I'm gonna have to listen to that in post and see how good it is.
Because otherwise, it's all gone.
Yeah. I know it's cut out. So. Maybe you guys should stop being hacks and do something that isn't a podcast.
Are we recording?
No. Yes.
No.
You're listening to Laughing Historically with Adam Lax, Adam Coonen, and Dr. History Scholar.
Welcome to Laughing Historically. I'm your host, Adam Lax. And on the ones and twos, we got Adam Coonen. And we got Dr. History, Sage, Scholar, important person of the universe.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Party animal.
Party.
I've been told that a lot.
Yeah.
Most people, they meet me, they're like, that man knows how to party.
Moral emperor? Perhaps
Moral emperor.
Yeah,
we might eventually. We might have to make a spreadsheet of possible monikers.
Yeah. I have to sit up a little bit straighter if I'm an emperor. I didn't bring any purple.
Dr. Caesar, history scholar, Kaiser.
He starts speaking in third person.
Yes, in third person in Latin, and then Coonen will have to kill me.
Yeah. I will. Which do you prefer? Because they're all bad. Caesar, Kaiser, or Czar? Because I want to know which one of those.
I mean, if I had to pick one of those three, it's Caesar, but because the other two in my...
So the one who did the most slavery. Got it. Moving on. All right. Wait, finish your thought, though.
I mean, my thought is that you're so far removed from Caesar that, the connotations one way or the other. It's not just that like their grandchildren are dead, it's that their grandchildren's grandchildren's grandchildren are dead.
That makes sense.
And most of the people who existed at that time, no one identifies that as anymore.
There
are people who live in Italy and there are people who live in France, but they don't identify as Romans or Gauls. Right? Like, whereas there are
except Charles de Gaulle. I guess
but he's dead. So but whereas like there are people whose grandparents were murdered by either a Kaiser or a Tsar, and you're like,
they're a part of modern history.
Exactly.
Also, there's just a chance that our listeners might be like, "Oh, Dr. History Scholar's Hispanic." That's pretty crazy. I didn't know that. He's not, by the way, you guys. He's the whitest.
That's right. Probably true.
And we're gonna talk about this day in history.
Yeah. So today is October 27th. So firstly, it's happy 166th birthday to Theodore Roosevelt, President Theodore Roosevelt.
Happy birthday to me.
So if the hero of the podcast is Dan the Man Sickles, I think that Theodore Roosevelt at this point is the patron saint of the podcast. Either that or Olga of Kiev. Olga of Kiev might be the actual patron saint.
Well, Dr. History's Sage Scholar is a fanboy.
I am a big fanboy of Teddy Roosevelt. Though he isn't he doesn't make my top 3 of presidents. So my fanboyness doesn't get in the way of like actual ranking of presidents.
He's also wearing a Teddy Roosevelt shirt for all the listeners.
Exactly,
just to visualize.
Yeah. I would love to bring Teddy Roosevelt back to life like now. You know what I mean? It'd be very like, so fellas, I hear about this thing called a strip club.
He would not be down with that.
Definitely not be down for
that. He was kind of a prude.
Right, but he died. I don't know how that changed his
It's like
personality.
neck and neck between Dr. History Sage Scholar and his moral probity. Like I feel like that. Like,
that's maybe where he originally. Well, being that Dr. History Deity Scholar is a god on Earth, Teddy got it from him. So Dr. History Deity Scholar begot Teddy Roosevelt, who is his one only begotten son. My mother was a virgin. My father didn't fight the war.
But also on this day in 939 AD, Athelstan, which is Anglo-Saxon for noble stone, king of the English, died, and he is considered by most historians to be the greatest of the Anglo-Saxon kings. So the kings between Alfred the Great and William the Conqueror.
Why was he so great?
Mainly, he managed to like keep everything together. He fought off Vikings,
Yeah, that was during like the big Danish invasions, and they basically conquered like everything.
The Vikings nearly
most of continental Europe.
Well, they almost conquer all of England twice, and he's sort of in between that and managing to keep them on their side of the North Sea. And that is part of what we're going to be talking about today.
Hey!
It's related. Okay. So today's episode is 1066, the year of the conquest.
No! Oh, God. Consider we've talked so much shit about every Southerner who's like, my ancestry. Did you know my great-grandfather? My accents are all over the goddamn place today. I say, my ancestors were at 1066.
Probably.
No. Probably not.
You're on the right track.
So before we get really in here in earnest, I want to ask just a couple of questions.
All right.
12 inches. Is
that
not what you were going to
ask? 2, what do you already know? What do you guys know about the Norman Conquest, aside from the idea that most of the Southern aristocracy claimed descent from Norman knights?
William the Conqueror.
You know William the Conqueror?
So I let him go first because I assumed he knew the least. No. So it was, I want to say, was it Harold was the king of the actual Anglo-Saxons at
Harold
the time?
Godwinson.
Harold Godwinson. I almost said Harold Hardrada, but that was
that's a Norwegian king who also claims the throne of England in this period of time.
But Harold Godwinson, if I remember correctly, basically had to fight like 2 battles, I think, within 48 hours of each other.
Almost.
And but he won the first battle in the north, and then had to march his troops all the way down south to fight William the Conqueror, and like. they were gonna win the battle, from my understanding. If you don't want me to go too far into this, but if they were gonna win the battle, but then he got like injured by like an arrow, basically, and I think lost an eye or something.
That's in the Bayeux tapestry. It shows him dying by an arrow in the eye.
Yeah.
I know about that tapestry.
Yeah,
it's a really impressive.
It's a very impressive tapestry. And so that's the first question. So second, have you heard of any of the following men? We've talked about William the Conqueror and Harold Godwinson.
Wait, hang on, before you go, do they all have like Guy the blank names?
Almost all of them.
Oh, I'm so excited. It's going to be like Utheldorf the long-sticked, and it's going to be like, it's going to be great. Like,
Have either of you ever heard of Edward the Confessor?
Yep.
Okay. Have you heard of Edward the Confessor?
Maybe.
Okay. Well, you're going to learn about him. We talked a little bit about Harold Godwinson. Have either of you heard of Harold Hardrada?
No. Yeah.
Okay. So and then William the Conqueror, and then lastly or third, what do you know about the Dark Ages? Like,
I mean,
they had lighting issues apparently.
No electricity. My understanding is that it's actually the term the Dark Ages is more or less
It's a misnomer, right?
Well, it's out of favor amongst historians. The reason it was called the Dark Ages is two-faceted by my understanding. Why do you got to quiz us, Dr. History? Anyway,
it was after the fact. They weren't referring to themselves.
We're
true. Living in the Dark Ages, everybody.
Right. And it was mostly because the Roman Empire had fallen, and because after the Renaissance, kind of like the Greek and Roman world was seen as like the apex,
pinnacle of civilization.
And therefore, because it wasn't that anymore, it must be, quote, dark.
Right.
The other part of it is it comes from a very, very, very Eurocentric worldview, because during the Dark Ages, places like India and
China.
And the Near East. Right, or sorry, it's
East,
Western Asia, I guess we should call it these days, but Middle East, Western Asia, were having like their own pre-Renaissance, Renaissance,
right?
like literally they didn't probably invent the concept of zero, but like we use their numbers.
I mean, they preserved Arabic. Much of what the Romans had created, essentially, right?
Yeah, and most of most European texts of Roman and Greek literature is translated out of Arabic, right? Like they go to the Middle East, especially during the Crusades, and then they come home having translated, Greek and Roman literature and history and such, and put it back from Arabic into Latin.
Yeah, it's one of my more favorite like memes. Is just like, whatever we do, we better not teach Middle Eastern math in schools.
Exactly,
like, algebra. Because I'm pretty sure it's called algebra for a reason.
Have fun doing any amount of math in Roman numerals. Yes, you will hemorrhage. But then
zero.
What I've heard from some more modern historians is that they will use the term Dark Ages, but they use it now to denote the fact that there aren't a lot of actual historical documents. It's almost like it's opaque. It's dark because you can't see into it, because so much of the stuff from that period is lost. Right? So much of it got destroyed. Because it is, at least in Europe, a very unstable time. This isn't to say that nothing good happened. It's just that if the Vikings come over the next, come over the sea and burn everything, and you only have one copy of every document you've ever written, and it's all gone.
Yeah. Have you ever read How the Irish Saved Western Civilization? Or
No.
So it's a pretty small book. It's somewhat like kind of tongue-in-cheek titled or whatever, but one of the main points of the book is like a lot of Western and like Greek literature, like translated literature down through the ages, essentially was preserved. Not because Ireland was like sort of on the edge of the world and no one really wanted to conquer it, but they had enough Catholic monasteries doing that translation work that it sent a lot of those direct primary source documents kind of down through the ages.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's a good book. But it's like kind of controversial or whatever.
Yeah. So. And then last question, just real quick.
Yeah.
In your opinions, what do you think makes someone a great leader? Like, what are the qualities that you look for in, and what do you believe is the criteria to say that someone was a great leader?
That's a good question. I don't know. Assertive, I guess. Also willing to, delegate and have good people around them to give them good advice?
I'd say it depends on the system they're leading.
Yeah.
Right? Because like I want to say it's not Pericles. It's the Athenian leader who kind of like not at Marathon, but at the battle after that where he fought the Persians. I forget. I want to say it's like Pericles.
Yeah, Pericles is the leader. Yeah, the one who gives like the funeral oration and fights the Battle of Salamis.
Yes. So my understanding is that he was a great leader, but he was a great leader of a democracy, which is a different thing than being a great leader of a kingdom or an empire.
Fair enough.
Because if you're a great leader, like if you're, say, Constantine or, you know, one of the great Roman emperors who like did this amazing stuff, Trajan and Augustus, etc., you're kind of doing everything. Like you have to sort of be this like analytical genius. You have to have a very strong personality. You have to be willing to shed a lot of blood to like keep your place in power and like and fight and be at the top. Whereas if you're Pericles, or you're, another good example in my opinion is FDR, right? Your leadership has a lot less to do with your ability to like demand and command as your ability to like convince and manipulate.
Work with different types of people.
Right, but also see the writing on the wall. Like, and I've mentioned this on a past podcast, but after we started fighting World War II and FDR gave this speech about, and Dan Carlin does a big thing on this, but he basically says like, Japan and Germany think that we're a nation of playboys, that we'd have other people do our fighting for us. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's this very deft thing where he's like, well, I can't command Americans to fight this war. They're going to be like, go fuck yourself, we're Americans. But I can tell them that all these other people around the world think you're pussies. And they're going to be like, oh, they said what? You know what I mean? So it's kind of...
Or someone like LBJ, he's very effective as like someone be able to pass legislation, like a lot of legislation, like when he was a senator, leader of the Senate and as a president.
This is his trick, just to like invite people into the bathroom so that they can see his dick.
Well,
so having a huge dick helps
he had a lot of talks in the bathroom stalls, apparently. He'd make his aides sit next to him while he was sitting on the toilet or some shit like that.
That is a power move. I know that's happened.
Okay, so keep these in mind, because today what we're going to do is explore the four men who wore or claimed the crown of England in 1066. Edward the Confessor, Harold Godwinson, Harold Hardrada, and William of Normandy. I want you to tell me at the end, if you could have been back then and backed any of them, who would you have backed and why? So I want you to think about who would you have been.
This is a leadership seminar.
A little bit, yeah. I'm starting my new project, my new adventure.
Right. Dale Carnegie.
Yeah.
Right. Listeners, we're going to pause real quick so that Adam and I and Dr. History Scholar can all grab hands and make sure that we're holding them and then untangle the knot.
Oh yeah, we're going to have a trust walk at the end of this.
Yeah. We're going to walk on coals.
Probably.
That's good.
Unrelated. Anyway.
You just tripped me because you're mad at all the interruptions.
So part one, the Confessor and the Heir. In 1015, a Danish army of 10,000 men carried in 200 longships landed on the south coast of England. They were led by possibly the greatest Viking warlord of the age, Canute, King of Denmark. Opposing him... Canute, C-N-U-T. Opposing him was the unlucky Anglo-Saxon king Ethelred the Unready, which is a pun. His name is
Unready.
Yeah. So all Anglo-Saxon names have like I said at the beginning, Ethelstone is noble stone or whatever, or Ethelstan. Ethelred means well advised, and
he called himself.
No, that was the name given to him.
Okay.
His name means well advised. Ethelred the Unready is a pun because we get the word unready from the Anglo-Saxon word unred, which unred means poorly advised. So his name means well advised, poorly advised. So his name is a pun, Ethelred the Unready. And he seems to have been like a decent person, and just everything went wrong.
Just didn't do his homework.
Everything went wrong. I don't even think it's his fault. Just he doesn't know that Canute the Great is going to come with 10,000 Vikings and just ruin everything.
I just I can't help but keep thinking of names that are like that. like Harry Smooth. Like, that would be a good one. You know what I mean? That'd be a fun one.
So by the end of the year, by the end of 1015, Canute controlled most of the country. On April 23rd, 1016, Ethelred died, and Canute was crowned king the following July. Oh. That same month, he married the widow of Ethelred, Emma of Normandy. Yeah.
That's like, I'm going to cuck you after you're in the ground. Like, that's rough. That is rough.
Is that typical?
Yes.
The kind of...
A little bit.
I'm going to kill you and take your life.
And Emma of Normandy is a really fascinating historical figure. Like, we might do an episode on her because she's very interesting.
Okay.
But this conquest in this marriage planted the seeds for the Norman Conquest 49 years later. So get ready for the bloodiest episode of Jerry Springer.
Oh.
The man...
Jerry.
I got to be honest, you're up against some competition. That's not...
So the man who would be known to history as Saint Edward the Confessor was born somewhere between the year 1003 and 1005. He was the son of Ethelred.
Where does he get that nickname, the Confessor?
Well, we'll get to that, and he is eventually canonized. He's made a saint in the Catholic Church.
Oh.
But he's the son of Ethelred and Emma, right? So, and following Canute's invasion and his marriage to Emma, all of Ethelred's children, and Emma is Ethelred's second wife. His first wife dies. All of Ethelred's children are disinherited, right? So. Because of this, Edward and his younger brother Alfred flee to Normandy, where they would remain for the next 20 years because they're living with their mother's cousins, right, the Dukes of Normandy. Living at the Duke of Normandy's court, again, who are their cousins. So Canute was seemingly a decent enough king, and when he died in 1035, after ruling for nearly 20 years, no one in England opposed his son Harold becoming king. So Harold's son, from his marriage to Emma, becomes king in 1035.
And that's Harold Godwinson?
No, different Harold.
Just a quick question. Is this typical where like people in that time period where people would come from the outside and take over and then just prop themselves up as a monarch?
Yeah. You could do it because, again, there's no real concept of nation.
Right.
So the being ruled by an outsider, quote unquote, only matters if that outsider becomes a giant dick all the time, everywhere, for all things. So, like, as long as you're respecting the
local traditions.
The local traditions enough, right? You might change some of them to suit your needs. And as long as you're not overly imposing in terms of taxes, and as long as you're reasonably good at dispensing justice and reasonably good at maintaining peace and order, people don't mind being ruled by outsiders as much as they would today. Like today, this doesn't make any sense to say, oh, someone from another country came in, invaded, blew everything up, and now they're in charge. No country would stand for that because the concept of nation sort of revolts at it.
You saw how well that worked in Iraq.
Exactly. Or the Russians are seeing the Russians are seeing how well it's working in Ukraine, right? Like,
well, and the other thing too is that I think the thing that like people forget about the Dark Ages is that you had these like shadows. My understanding is that you had these shadows of Roman rule, and one of the things that the Roman Empire did for however many 100 years, 300 years or whatever, or at least when it had expanded, is kind of destroy the idea of a lot of these like different ethnic groups and different, like you kind of like would know that you are like Anglo-Saxon or you would know that you were Gallic or something like that. But like it just politically, it didn't matter anymore because it was replaced with the Roman idea of the client. The client relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely part of it. I think the other part of it is the average person doesn't travel more than like 20 or 30 miles and is illiterate. Modern England, like England, not just Britain, modern England has a population of somewhere around 40 million. Anglo-Saxon England at the time of the conquest has maybe a population of like 1 million. Like you might not be able to travel from one village to the next in a single day, right? Like that's how diffuse the population is.
Spread out.
And when you have that, you don't have a concept that the person in the next village is like the same as you, in the same way that that once you get to the printing press and once you get to mass literacy and once you get to mass communications, now you can say, oh, even though that person lives hundreds and hundreds of miles away, or in the case of like the United States or Russia, even thousands of miles away, they're still like me because we live in the same country and we read the same newspapers and we listen to the same stuff.
Speak the same language.
Exactly, yeah.
Shared.
And whereas England...
Our big Swifties.
Yeah. But Canute's son Harold, his reign is short. He dies in 1040 to be succeeded by his half-brother, Harthacanute. Harthacanute dies in 1042, possibly in the middle of a drunken toast at a wedding. That's a possibility. That's a story that's told, is that he gets up to give a toast during a wedding and like suffers an aneurysm and dies.
And I would like to give my blessings to the luck and fortune of the new...
Yep. And
that's a bad omen for that wedding.
Man,
or whatever.
So neither of these men... Neither of these men had viable heirs, and so into this void, the Earls of England, led by Earl Godwin, who we're going to talk a little bit more about later, brought Edward out of exile from Normandy, brought Edward the Confessor out of exile in Normandy, and made him King of England. Right? So the Earls, the leading men of England, go, Canute's line is basically done. We got an Anglo-Saxon king sitting in Normandy. He's just been sitting in storage for 20 years, and they bring him out and they bring him back to England.
They blow the dust off him.
Basically. And so he is, at this point, Edward is about 38. He's unmarried, and he's the only surviving son of the 17 children of Ethelred and Canute. Between the two of them, Ethelred and Canute had 17 children, and at this point, Edward is the only one left alive. And both of those men are married twice.
Oh my God.
So out of 4 marriages, only one surviving heir of 17.
On a completely unrelated note, why were the populations so low?
So since Edward needs a wife, the most powerful man in the country, Earl Godwin, offers his daughter Edith to be his bride. Edward is in no position to refuse Godwin, and so he reluctantly marries Edith. Now, a woman who's roughly half his age. He's 38, and she's about 20 at the time of their wedding.
Okay. I was actually expecting a lot worse than that. So
they remain childless. They never have any children, and their not producing heirs is a source of a huge amount of speculation historically. There are stories that Edward, out of spite for Godwin and from religious piety, never consummated their marriage. That like he's like, I will marry Edith because you made me, but I don't like you, so I am not going to give you the satisfaction of grandchildren who will one day become king.
Historical sources at this time must have been very sketchy.
So there's that, and then there's also the fact of which ones survive to us and which ones are available. One of the things that's really interesting about this is that there are histories of this period, and the histories are always commissioned by someone.
Right, so there's always a point of view.
Exactly, and this is a pretty Victorian view of it. If you read any history of the Normans from the Victorian period, they're going to talk about how Edward the Confessor, out of spite and piety, never consummated their marriage because what they're doing is reading the histories that the Normans themselves commissioned, and the Normans will play this up.
And because the Normans had a very strong
interest in making Edward
moralistic,
and making Edward in particular look really good, and we'll get to that later. But one of the things that places where they get...
Or he just didn't like her, and the whole time she was like, why?
But the thing is...
Why will you like me? She's got jagged teeth, and they're kind of green.
Just have sex with me, Jesus.
So
why won't you just consummate this marriage?
So the reason we know that that's probably not it...
Just because I haven't bathed in 6 months, you don't want to consummate this marriage.
So...
1 year.
The reason we know that that's probably not true...
Why?
Is because
that is the worst female voice I've ever.
I'm very offended by that.
It sounds like a bad South Park character.
I'm very upset that you would say that.
So,
beef cake.
All right. Anyway,
so the reason we know that's probably not the case is that the actual primary sources that modern historians use are charters. So the king would charter something, whether it was a cathedral or he's giving a charter of liberties to a particular town in exchange for money, and those are all signed. Those are witnessed.
real quick, just because I don't want Adam Lax to be confused. Can you explain what a charter is?
So these would be legal documents. Like today, they would just be laws, but they don't have a legislative body.
Yeah, so I'll admit I don't know what it is either. So, but I just know charter a plane, which is like I buy like you rent a plane.
No, it's more like the charter.
UN has a charter.
Yeah, the charter,
the founding document.
Yeah, a founding document is something, or it's a law, it's a grant. You might say be granting someone land, and these are witnessed by people, and you can see the witness lists. And Edith is on almost every single one of his documents. She's always there witnessing his charters. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that they had at a minimum, they had a very like useful relationship. That she was helpful to him.
His beard, maybe.
So we're getting to that.
Oh, okay.
So
or just he couldn't do anything without her bothering him. Like,
Edward, where are you going? Are you going to charter something? Because if you're chartering, I want to be there.
So
I want to be at the charter.
So she just followed him around like a lost puppy.
No, just like
Every time you leave, I want to make sure I'm there. I want to be to see the charter.
So
I don't know why I find that voice very funny.
I don't know either because I find it grating.
Every time he goes to do anything, like I just gotta take a shit or whatever.
Is there a charter?
No, it was Edith. Was her name?
Edith.
No, Edith. There isn't a charter.
Okay, because if it's a charter, I want to be there.
So the actual list of possibilities. Is the idea that the possibility that Edward was homosexual, right, and that they never consummated their marriage essentially out of lack of attraction. Now, the problem with this sort of line of thought is that we don't have any other evidence to suggest this. Whereas, like for instance, it isn't to say that that the evidence doesn't exist. It's just that we don't have these records.
Yeah,
and whereas
have the other guys he was with.
But the thing is that, for instance, there is like a candidate for an English king in the Middle Ages who was homosexual, which is Edward II.
Mm-hmm. Really?
Because Edward II, there was a knight in his retinue named Piers Gaveston, and Edward II,
a knight in his retinue.
Piers Gaveston.
Piers.
Oh my God.
Like Piers Morgan.
Yeah.
No, but
Piers, you're Gaveston.
but like, there's a lot of evidence that they had a relationship that was not simply good friends, right?
Special friends.
There's
like if I remember correctly, there's like primary source documents of people being like, I saw them making out in the garden. They weren't that like chill about it.
Well, and Edward II is married to Isabella of France, and they have children. But she will complain that he like abandons her to spend more time with Piers. Right? She's like, I'm his wife, and he just really likes hanging out with that dude.
A lot of overnight camping trips.
Exactly. But so with Edward the Confessor,
bye, honey, we're going hunting.
With Edward the Confessor, there's no candidates for these. There's no equivalents.
He has no.
There's no Piers Gavestons running around in the 1050s for us to think about.
No knight in his retinue.
There's no other Canute around. Just like, I'll tell you something he didn't confess about. He didn't confess about everything.
So it may have been.
There were Roman baths around too, if I remember correctly. So, bathhouse action.
It may have been asexuality, right? What David Haworth in his book calls a distaste or inhibition. Right, that he just might have been really disinterested.
Also, this is a serious note. Whenever somebody's like, "Oh, they were a king or some other important noble where like lineage matters," right? And they're like, "Well, they didn't have kids because they were gay," as if gay men can't like put semen in women.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like it's like tons of gay men have had
Edward
kids.
II.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Like it's not. I'm sure he just closed his eyes and thought about Pierce or whatever, you know what I mean? But like, it's not. To me, that always seems like one of the worst like when you consider how many other problems even in the modern day people can have having children, that generally seems like one of the worst like ideas about it, of just like, because even if you're gay, if you're not a complete moron, you're like, well, my family still needs an heir. You know what I mean? Like it's not, it's just a fact of life for them. So I generally don't buy it.
Yeah, and so that's what leads to the last possibility, which is that either he or Edith had some
shooting blanks.
Well, either of them had some fertility problem.
Yeah, you wouldn't know.
Exactly. And
Edith, put on this armor.
So
put on these men's armor real quick and put the helmet down, and we're gonna make some. All right.
So for a man who lived over 1,000 years ago, it's hard to pin down with any kind of exactitude, right? Yeah. And the case for infertility can be made during Edward's actions. At one point in like 1052, he essentially stages a self-coup and banishes Earl Godwin's entire family from the country. He gets rid of Godwin, gets rid of all of his sons, and he puts Edith in a nunnery, which seems like the first step towards dissolving that marriage so that he could get remarried on the grounds of, like, I would like to have children, right? That does seem to be, that would be why you would do that. Or at least one of the reasons why you would do that is to dissolve that marriage.
That was the only way to get well, not a divorce, but
to get an annulment. And it was very difficult to end a marriage in the 11th century especially for someone like Edward the Confessor, who is religiously devout. So
Edward, why are my bags packed? Why are my bags packed? Why are these men where are they taking me?
They put a fucking hood over her head.
So where am I
going? So for all of this, his relationship with Edith seems to have been cordial. That's literally the next sentence in my script. Edith did commission a history of her late husband, in which she, unsurprisingly,
she voluntarily went to the nunnery.
She did not. That is not part of that. But she features very heavily in this. But she is, again, like I said, she's the witness and signatory to a bunch of charters while Edward is king, and is routinely referred to in documents as being one of his counselors. Like, they use that word when describing her, is that she is one of the counselors to the king.
All right, fine, I'll stop doing the voice, guy.
Thank you. So what is clear from our sources is that Edward had two great loves, religion and hunting. Religion may have been a coping mechanism for having had a very lonely and very traumatic childhood, right? He's essentially a war refugee at like the age of 10. Oh, wow. His mother remarries and disinherits him. Wow. And then he gets brought back to England by the man who may or may not have murdered his younger brother. That's one of the reasons he doesn't like Earl Godwin, is that Earl Godwin is vaguely responsible for the death of Alfred. Okay. He saw the God and the devil in everything and attended mass daily, including before his many hunts. He would go to mass and then go hunting. Wow. While his title, the Confessor, might suggest a quiet man, it is said that he had a terrible temper and could descend into vindictiveness. And so the Confessor is the idea that he's making up for it after the fact. He would come down, his temper would calm, and he would ask for forgiveness.
Well, and that's, you know, again, not to be a bummer, but that is pretty. That's a pretty common symptom, we'll say, of like CPTSD and PSD and other like abuse, is that you'll have like big anger management problems, essentially. And then feel bad about it.
Exactly, and so even this vindictiveness, even this temper, never actually resulted in like killing, torturing, mutilating, or even imprisoning his enemies. He just exiled them. Right? That was his thing. If you pissed off Edward the Confessor, he'd tell you to pack your bags and get out.
And that's a big deal to be exiled at that time.
Well, and part of it is that it's the only place you've ever known. Part of it is that very few people know more than one language, and when you visit other countries, very few people are tolerant of hearing languages that aren't their own in the 11th century. But there's also the idea of like, what are your means going to be once you leave? Exile for some people is just a death sentence on the basis of you won't have enough money to live in another place.
And like, how are you going to find a profession?
Exactly.
Like, the amount of time, like, you know, as someone who's learned another language, the amount of time it takes you to learn another language, even when you're immersed, like,
might be longer than the amount of resources you have to survive.
Survive and live.
Now, when he calmed down, he very often would forgive the offender and as penance for his own sins. moments of wrath and envy, and then he'd invite them home, right?
When you consider how long it took to travel anywhere, you could just see people like taking baby steps, like just. He's going to invite me back?
Yeah.
Can I go back? Can I go
slowly
back?
stepping out.
You are 50 yards out of the Capitol. No, not yet. Go another 100. And then
as an exercise in Christian ethics, it may have been effective, but as public policy, it left something to be desired. So now let us discuss Earl Godwin. He bears a passing resemblance to Joe Kennedy Sr. He was from a relatively modest background, right? It is not entirely clear, but it seems that he may have been what was called in Anglo-Saxon England a thane, and thanes are roughly the equivalent of like a knight.
But more like a hedge knight as opposed to like a landed knight, right? Where it's like you're a great warrior and you probably have enough resources for like a horse, armor, and weapons, but that's it.
And like Kennedy, he was ruthlessly ambitious, understood that he could never reach the pinnacle of power, but that his children might.
Weren't thanes always sworn to someone though?
Yeah.
They're
But what he understands is that even when he makes it to becoming Earl, he could never become king. But he's like, my sons and my daughter might, right? He marries his daughter to the king on the idea that like my grandchildren will then become the kings and queens of England. Thus, he pushed them all to do so. He pushes all of his children into doing great things. He married an in-law of King Canute and was made an earl by the same. So like that's the thing is he betrays Ethelred the Unready and joins Canute's forces during that invasion. And then when it becomes clear that the Danes have sort of overstayed their welcome, he's the leading man to bring back Edward the Confessor. The man doesn't seem to have the ability to like maintain loyalty. If it benefits him, he will drop whoever it is that he's currently loyal to.
Real Littlefinger, Tywin Lannister vibes.
So it was said, quote, he could be loyal, just, and eloquent, end quote, and that even his enemies respected him. But this smacks a lot of like pandering histories because, again, he was ruthlessly ambitious and capable of treachery. Again, like I said, he switched sides from Ethelred to Canute and from Canute to his sons and from his sons to Edward, the son of Ethelred, right? He comes full circle.
And sorry because I feel like this might be an important digression. Like we talked a little bit when we did like American Revolution and stuff about like Benedict Arnold and like how bad it was at the time, dishonorable it was to switch sides. Was there like a different level of dishonor to that kind of thing at this time? Like it seems like you don't really like a lot of people.
He played it well. That's part of the thing that he does is he always manages to find just enough like legal cover, as it were,
like justification
that on points and on paper he never really does anything wrong. But there are if you did not, and so if you were a friend of Earl Godwin, if like you were a guy who got along with Godwin, like you understood each other, you talked sort of the same way, you'd be like, well, of course, you were put into a bad spot and you did what you had to do. And if you didn't like Earl Godwin, you went, that guy wouldn't know loyalty if it bit him in the ass, right? Like he engenders no neutral feeling. Earl Godwin, there is no one who views Earl Godwin and goes, meh. Everyone is like either he's great. He's a very effective,
polarizing person.
He's a very polarizing person, and he doesn't have the ability to reconcile people. He doesn't have the ability to go out to someone who doesn't like him and be like, "Hey, can I convince you?" And he doesn't care. Right? That's the other part of his personality. He's like, "Fuck him. I don't care. I've got money. I've got land. I've got soldiers. I've got influence. Like I don't care if a person doesn't like me." Again, very Joe Kennedy Sr. And so by the time Edward comes to the throne and marries Edith, Godwin and his sons together controlled 4 out of the 6 earldoms of England, and Godwin's income is as great as the king's. Ooh. So between him and his sons, they control over half of the land in England, and Godwin himself can outspend the king.
Ooh, yeah. That's never a good political position.
This is part of the reason Edward doesn't like him, right? Edward doesn't like him because he understands, he's almost 40 when he comes out of exile. He understands that the only reason he's allowed to wear a crown is because this up-jumped cutthroat who betrayed his father and then betrayed the man who betrayed his father, like, is the man who gave him his crown. And he finds that, I think, very frustrating.
Not to be too, like, gamesmanship, like, Total War about this, but, like, is there a certain level of, like, micromanagement a leader can do over their like lands that will make them more money? You know what I mean? Like, or is it just kind of like it's just about size and population?
It's about size and population, and it's about there's a bit of like making sure that you're not needlessly spending. Like you need to try to make the books balance, but there isn't a whole lot more than that.
So it's essentially just accounting. Like it's not like a lot of like, oh, we've innovated in such and such way or whatever.
Not really. I mean, not at this point in history. So Edward and Godwin themselves could not have been more different, right? So David Haworth in his book 1066, The Year of the Conquest, writes that Edward was, quote, conscience-ridden, introspective, selfish, impractical, and Puritan, end quote, while Godwin was, quote, a hearty, pragmatic extrovert, a man who enjoyed his food and drink and other animal comforts, and seemed to have cared less about his soul's salvation, end quote.
I love it. This is a Victorian author?
No, this guy is from the 20th century. Okay. But he does have...
He's still a historian, so he's still very uncomfortable when it comes to sexuality. Yeah. So he said animal comforts, which meant whorehouses. I'm pretty sure it meant whorehouses.
That is a weird phrase to
He's an English author from the 1960s.
Yeah. So it's not
animal
Victorian.
Desire.
And
animal comforts.
The book 1060s, that his book, David Haworth's book, is really good as a like a general survey of
like a primer.
Yeah, because it's really short. It's only about 200 pages. 2, he's a very good author, so it's a very easy read. He does have a like nostalgic view of pre-conquest Anglo-Saxon England, and he's got some point. He's just a little overly. He has some biases that don't make any sense. It's not as though he's wrong for holding them because the alternatives are worse. Actually, he's just being a little too much like, oh, Anglo-Saxon England must have looked like... it must have looked just like the Shire. He has like a Tolkien-esque view of Anglo-Saxon
What do you mean
England.
the alternatives were worse?
The Normans. The Normans are, definitionally, the Normans are worse in their treatment of England than the Anglo-Saxons were.
Okay, so that's the alternative. I thought you meant like in general in the world. No. I was like, I'm pretty sure like Constantinople was doing okay.
No. But the idea of like that... When you compare the Anglo-Saxon rule of England to either the Viking invaders who came or the Normans who came after them, the Anglo-Saxons, for any particular problems they might have had, do treat their subjects better. Mm-hmm. But the idea that you'd want to trade places with any Anglo-Saxon peasant is just... No. So... In fact, Godwin seems to have been the only major figure, though, of the period who did not found a single church or endow an abbey in the maintenance of his soul. Like, he just doesn't. There does seem to be evidence that he endowed a monastery as a favor to his wife, mainly because he may have been cheating on her. And that might have been the reason. But it's for her, not for him, right? The endowment is in her name, paid for by him, rather than in his own name.
Godwin, you better make a fucking abbey for me because you keep cheating on me in the whorehouses and I want to go to heaven.
So Edward...
You're not going to heaven, but I want to go to heaven.
Fine, God, all right. I brought her back.
So Edward, afraid and jealous of Godwin, had a habit of taking decisions entirely out of spite. And indeed, Edward managed to exile Godwin and his family briefly in 1052. We talked about that. It is during that period that Edward brought Normans over. So he sends Godwin and his family out, and he knows Normans, right? He's not only cousins with the Duke of Normandy, but like...
He grew up there.
He grew up there. He knows them. He invites some Normans over to help administer the country. And this is probably where William of Normandy gets it in his head that Edward promised him the throne. Is that there's some evidence that William... who is Duke of Normandy at this point, comes to England in 1052 and probably talks with Edward. And he comes back from this trip thinking that Edward has said, you are my heir. If I don't have any children, I want you to be the next king of England. And so Godwin dies in 1053. And when Godwin dies in 1053, it's at this point at the story that people start to really worry about the succession because Edward and Edith don't have any children, and the most powerful man in the country has died. So officially, Edward, with the backing of his wife Edith, chose his distant cousin. Edward has a very distant cousin Edward the Exile, who is living in Hungary.
Edward the Exile.
Living in Hungary?
Yeah, that's how far he had to go to get...
Holy shit.
That's how far he had to go to get away from Canute.
Holy God.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so he'd been there for like 20 or 40 years.
That's like 15 languages away. Probably more at this time period. Too.
That's insane.
So so Edward and Edith pick Edward the Exile. He's
sending someone to go find him.
It took them a decade to find where he was. No, I'm not joking. He has been sending people across Europe because he knows this. Edward the Exile is the last son of Edward's half brother, whose name was Edmund Ironside.
Okay.
And Edward knows that his half-brother Edmund had a son named Edward. They all have the same frickin' name. I'm really sorry. They're all Edward, Edmund, or Edgar. And so he's like...
Edward, Edgar.
I know, but Edward the Confessor is going, I know that my half-brother has a son. I know he got out of England. We need to find him. And so he goes and finds him. Unfortunately... Edward the Exile dies in 1057, and so his son, Edgar, is about 5. And Edgar is brought to England and is adopted by Edward and Edith.
Wow.
They adopt him, and they give him the nickname Etheling. So he is referred to as Edgar Etheling, and Etheling means throne-worthy in Anglo-Saxon. It's the title you would give to a crown prince.
Working on a little bit of nominative determinism right there. Yeah.
So 1065 was to be the last...
so were they, at that time, speaking... They're not speaking English.
They're speaking Old English.
Old English.
So it doesn't, you and I couldn't read it. But again, the word unread, right, which I said at the beginning, it's Ethelred the Unready. Unread means poorly advised in Old English, but it looks like the word unready, right, in modern English. And that's where we get the word unready. Comes out of that. It's spelled UNRAED, unread.
Okay.
So in 1065 is the last year of Edward's life, and one of Godwin's son, Tostig, who we'll feature later, who is the Earl of Northumbria, which is northern England, up against the border with Scotland, based around the city of York. The Northumbrians revolted against Tostig. They don't like him. And Edward wanted to crush the rebellion because Tostig is the only one of Godwin's sons that he likes. Because when he comes to the throne, Tostig is still in his late teens, and so it's like having a younger brother. And so he likes Tostig, but none of the other English earls want to crush the rebellion because they say, not entirely without merit, that this was all Tostig's fault. If he'd been a good earl, there wouldn't have been a rebellion. And so Godwin's eldest son and successor, Harold, this is why he's called Harold Godwin's son. He's the son of Godwin. It's that Scandinavian naming convention. Harold Godwinson convinces Edward to exile Tostig instead. So Harold has his own brother exiled for the good of the realm. He's like, we're not going to crush the rebellion, but we can't keep you in power, so you can just leave. And so this seems to have broken Edward, because again, like I said, Tostig's the only one of Godwin's family that he could even seem to like, other than maybe Edith. I do think he did like Edith, but Tostig is the only one of the boys, the only one of Godwin's sons that he liked. So between November and December of 1065, Edward suffered a series of debilitating strokes. He managed to be present for Christmas, but during the night of January 4th through 5th of 1066, Edward died. His last words to Harold, according to the Vitae Edward Regis, the history of King Edward, commissioned by Queen Edith, were, quote, "I commend the Queen and all the kingdom to your protection," end quote. Those are his last words to Harold. This will be the basis of Harold's claim to the throne. Harold will use this as saying, he has given me, he has entrusted to me his wife, who's my sister. He's entrusted to me the kingdom. Obviously, he meant that I should be the king.
But this is post-stroke?
Yes. Post many strokes.
You guys are protected the realm.
Yeah.
I heard protection of the realm. You guys all hear that? Did you guys all hear that?
And every single person in the room went, yes. Absolutely.
Right,
People liked Harold. So this
could have said anything.
So Edward was buried in
It's like the bottle has wings.
protection of the realm. Yes, got it.
I smell purple. Toast.
Grass clippings.
So Edward was buried in the unfinished church that he had started constructing, Westminster Abbey. So Edward the Confessor is the man who begins constructing Westminster Abbey.
Oh.
Now, Harold Godwinson was the second, and by 1054, the eldest of Earl Godwin's sons. So from 1054 until 1066, he is practically the ruler of England. He is functionally running the country for Edward. Being both, he was Earl, he held 2 earldoms at the same time, East Anglia and Hereford. So 2 of the 6, he owns a third of England's land. And he is referred to in contemporary documents either as Dux Angelorum, which means leader of the English, or sub regulus, second to the king. Right? Those are the ways people are referring to him at the time.
Okay.
So leader of the English or second to the king.
But second to the king who's dead?
This is while the king is alive.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
He's... and so people in England regarded him as the preserver of peace and prosperity for the 12 years before Edward's death. The vast majority of English people, if they knew who Harold Godwinson was, and the average English person probably didn't, but the average...
Harold who?
Yeah.
All right, sorry, I got to spread more shit on my field. I'll be back in a bit. Are you going to tell me more about this, what you call it, politics?
Yeah.
All right, it's fine there.
But the nobility in the Church of England, the nobility and Church of England view Harold as being the man who's kept everything.
Did Edward resent Harold?
No, not in the way that he resented his father. And that's partially because Harold is a much better human being than his father. Okay. He seems to have been a decent man. That's the next line.
Okay.
He was considered...
Getting way ahead of you.
He was considered far more normal than either Edward or his own father. Okay. And what I mean by that is that he tempers the religiosity of Edward and he tempers the worldliness of his father. So
Godwin.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So comparatively, he is normal, right?
Yeah.
He is religious without being a fanatic.
Yeah.
He
goes to church on Sunday, but he hits the whole house sometimes too. You know,
he's only human.
He was considered approachable. And he would listen to people's complaints and troubles without judgment. And part of the reason is that...
He's an earl you could have a beer with.
Yeah. A bit. But part of the reason he has to be this way is Edward the Confessor has a temper. And so part of his job is Edward would yell at people, and then Harold would have to go in and soothe ruffled feathers.
He's like Harold the diplomat.
Yeah.
Listen, man, I know he told you to sit on a pike and die, but he doesn't mean it. You know? Like, I feel like a lot of us have had, like, relationships in our life where we were, like, I don't know about you three, but I've had where it's like, I'm the one smoothing out the issues that your friend fucking causes because they just say crazy shit or they get angry or they do crazy shit or whatever.
I mean, people have to do that about me all the time.
No one's ever had to do that about you ever one single time. I think actually the way it works is you have to do that for me. I have to do that for Adam.
Yeah,
and Adam has to do that for someone else.
Coonen is the diplomat.
I know. It's my big, beautiful brown eyes.
It is. Anyway. So he had a knack for soothing injured pride and cooling impatient nobles. And while he had fought campaigns on the Welsh borders, he preferred persuasion to force, and there is a reason that all of the coins minted during his short reign bear the word Pax on them. Peace, yes. And Harold himself is, by this time, in 1066, he's in his early 40s. He was considered...
Which is like 95.
No, we talked about this.
as long as he doesn't.
No,
have,
I know.
Yeah, Sorry, that's
as long as he doesn't have syphilis.
They don't have that yet.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
It's another 500 years.
Yeah, it's a new world disease.
When the Black Death come? It's like
another 300 years. Yeah, so he's fine as long as he doesn't have like heart disease or a stroke. Yeah.
There's actually no diseases in England at this time. Yeah, they don't have contagious diseases yet. They came from
cholera.
France.
Yeah. It's utopia.
England, like that historian is like all communicable diseases came from France.
So
those whorehouses in France.
So Harold is in his early 40s. He's considered for the time tall, handsome, and healthy, aside from the early signs of rheumatism. So apparently he's got a little bit of like arthritis, early signs of arthritis. He was cheerful and courteous, except to enemies whom he, quote, threatened with the terrible face of a lion, end quote. He had a reputation for marching faster and farther than anyone else and was reasonably well educated, being able to read and write English, as well as speak and or understand French, Norse, Flemish, and possibly Latin.
Wow.
So he's a very well-educated man.
Yeah.
Harold would only officially marry after becoming king, and he would marry a woman named Edith of Mercia. this is the problem. There are going to be 2 more women named Edith. All of them are different. So he marries Edith of Mercia.
Those were the days.
So this marriage...
That's an All in the Family reference for those of you who are 95 years old. All right.
This marriage was to calm the northern earls and quiet the Welsh, whom Edith of Mercia is related to. Edith of Mercia is vaguely related to the Prince of Wales, and she's from the northern part of England, and northern England hadn't been consulted when Harold became king. So he comes up there and is like, hey, I'm marrying one of your people, and you're related to the Welsh people. Settle down. I have things to do.
Right. Wait, the Welsh were up north?
No, they're to the west, but just get an atlas. So Harold,
they're next to Hungary.
Yeah. No, they're not. Don't do that. You'll believe you. Harold,
I need a map.
It's okay. Geography's not your thing. That's fine.
Harold does seem to have had an unofficial, quote, Danish or common law wife, marriage to a woman named Edith the Fair. So he, yeah, I know.
Edith the Fair?
Edith the Fair. He was considered very beautiful.
And his first wife was actually called Edith the. Edith the.
So he
is that because they all had the same names? They had to add the whatever description.
That's part of it. The other part of it is that they don't quite yet have the concept of surnames, right? Like they just don't. Because even like Harold is from the house of Godwin. Well, Godwin is his dad's first name, right? That would be like, well, you're from the house of Adam. That doesn't help. Right,
right,
there are a lot of Adams.
Yeah. If I remember
There's
correctly,
2 of them. 2/3, a super majority of the people in this room are named Adam, and you're not related.
Well, and 2 at the time, like and that's for nobles, right? So nobles had to be like son of or like ruler of or whatever, like that, and you can see it in like common names today, like you'll like have a Spanish last name that's like Valencia, right? And that means they were from that place, like de Valencia or whatever. But in English, a lot of times people in their villages were just like, it was your name and then whatever your job was. Yeah, so they'd be like, Bob the Carpenter, Joe the Butcher, or whatever, which is why our last names now are Carpenter and Butcher and Smith and
Absolutely. Yep. So he and Edith the Fair are in a relationship that lasts about 20 years. They have 4 sons together. Wow. And while monks and Victorians will refer to Edith the Fair and women like her as concubines and mistresses.
Oh, dear.
She does way more than Edith of Mercia does in terms of being a queen, right? Like Edith of Mercia, he marries her in like February of 1066. He's going to, spoiler alert, he's going to be dead by October. She doesn't do a whole lot of queenly things, whereas Edith the Fair has more or less been his wife for like 20 years. So she's actually doing stuff.
And it seems like they like each other and have kids together. And all that stuff,
and there's no evidence that he ever had another relationship with anyone else, and there's no evidence that she ever actually married anyone, because she'll outlive him, and she never gets officially married. So the Anglo-Saxons in 1066 did not practice primogeniture, which is the idea that the firstborn son automatically succeeds. So for the title, especially not for the title of king, it was effectively an elective office with the earls and bishops being the electorate. So the earls and bishops of England decided who the king was.
Who were there more of? Were there more earls or more bishops?
There's about an equal number at the time. So while blood claims were useful, right, blood claims helped, they were essentially 4 criteria that were used to decide who should be the king. First, it should be a man of character to rule with strength and justice, right? So it needs to be someone who can rule with strength and justice. Second, if possible, they should be of royal blood, right? That is, again, they don't necessarily need to be the son of the king, like king's brothers or cousins, nephews, uncles, should have some royal blood. And the royal house to which Edward the Confessor belonged to was called the House of Wessex. They were the descendants of Alfred the Great. So Edward the Confessor is the last in the line of Alfred the Great. Third, The king should be English, right? We talked about this earlier. Foreign kings tended to treat England as a purse, right? Foreign kings tended to just treat
plunder.
And so they didn't like that. And so fourth, they would attempt to take the late king's wishes into account. So they would think about if the king said, hey, this is the person I would like to be my successor. They would be like, well, that weighs on the decision, but it wasn't necessary, right? So, unfortunately for what this group of people is called is the Wittemegot, which is the meeting of wise men. That's what that means in Anglo-Saxon. So, unfortunately for them, the people who chose the kings in 1066, no one person fit all of these criteria. There is nobody who fits all of the criteria who is an adult, who's of royal blood, who is English, who the late king wanted. No one fits all four. Thus, they picked Harold as the one who could conceivably fit points 1, 3, and 4. So he doesn't have royal blood, but he clearly everybody knows he's a man of strength and justice and that sort of thing. He is English, which is helpful, and he at least Edward the Confessor had at least entrusted him with a lot of authority. And there is that deathbed sort of quote that might seem to suggest that Edward wanted him to be king.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So they're all descendants of Anglo-Saxons, but they would refer themselves as English.
At this point, they do call themselves English.
Okay.
It had changed. I use the terms interchangeably. By around the year 900, between 900 and 1000 is when the Anglo-Saxons start referring to themselves as English. The guy said at the beginning.
Why does it change?
Honestly, I don't have a good. I don't actually have a good answer.
Curious.
No, I think part of it is that they've been there long enough, and there are other names like Albion and Britannia and Anglorum. There are these other names that predate the Anglo-Saxons, and they sort of start to take those things on.
Okay.
And there's also the fact that there are now more people. Ethnically, they aren't just They're not just Angles and Saxons anymore. There are other groups of people who have been sort of absorbed into the polity. So
probably Welsh, Danish,
exactly.
a lot of other
some French, Flemish, right? There's a lot of different people. Okay. And so Harold though fits at least 2, possibly 3 of the 4 criteria, so they make him king. On January 6th, 1066, King Edward was laid to rest in the morning in Westminster Abbey. In the afternoon, Harold was chosen to be king and was crowned, also in Westminster Abbey. So they have a funeral in the morning and a coronation in the afternoon. The timing of this
quick, everyone, clean up!
Yeah,
that's like a roller coaster of emotions, right there.
They're at the funeral. We have a hard out in 15 minutes. We gotta
hurry up, say goodbye. You gotta get buried.
Get that incense moving. Come on.
Is it back then when they sent them out into the river and burned them?
No, he's buried. Okay. He's because
Anglo-Saxons get buried and Vikings get burnt at sea.
Yeah, because they're Christians now.
Right.
So.
Okay.
Now the timing of the coronation is mostly political, right? Harold wants to get this done and hold both foreign and domestic rivals fait accompli to him being king, right? If he has been made king, then he knows there are people who think they should be king across the water. And he's like, what? I'm king. Too bad. Too late. You missed your chance.
Geopolitical nose goes,
exactly,
basically.
Yeah. And it's also, though, because January the 6th, 1066 was the feast of the...
January 6th. Okay.
Yes. Where were all these people on January 6th? They were in Westminster Abbey. They weren't at the Capitol. They're all cool. They're all cool.
Yeah, that's fine.
January 6th...
Stop the steal! Stop the steal!
They had a rally outside.
That is William of Normandy vibes right there. Stop the steal.
Oh my God.
He's like, it's supposed to be me. What the...
Yeah.
Listen, everybody. I've been in France. They've been very unfair to me.
So that
I'm going to go on Joe Rogan and talk about it.
William of Normandy would also go on Joe Rogan and talk about it. Harold
powerful William of Normandy here today. Jamie, look that up. Who's got claim? Jamie, look that up.
That date is also the Feast of the Epiphany, which is the last major feast day in the Catholic calendar before Easter. And since Catholic clergy are necessary for the ceremony, it was basically now or wait till April to get crowned. And so that is part of the. It's mostly to hold everyone else like to do the nose goes of geopolitics. But there is a logistical hurdle here, which is that Lent is about to start, and Catholics in the 11th century in Lent are not going to crown anyone. It's just that you'd have to wait until Easter, because you're supposed to be solemn and fasting, and you couldn't do like the feasting afterwards, and you couldn't do all of that stuff. So Harold's first act, again, is to travel north and meet his new wife and to soothe those northern lords, to be like, hey, I know I didn't really consult you about being king, but I'm king now, and it's going to be fine. And they were not...
Hey, Edith, the also pretty fair.
Do you just want to stay here in the north?
We're wife. You're my wife, but like you can show.
Yeah, you don't need to do anything. They were not the only ones taken aback by the news of Harold's accession. So why did Harold take the throne? Right. This is actually a really interesting question. Like, why did he do this? He does not have any royal blood, and by 1066,
could he have just like not wanted to and then not have done it?
Okay. Yeah. And by 1066, it is fairly clear to modern historians that Edward had chosen his heir. Right. That Edgar Atheling, right, who's 15 in 1066. Had been for a number of years the chosen designated heir of Edward the Confessor. That Edward had made it known to everybody in England that when he died, he wanted Edgar to be his heir. So, and again, Atheling is the Anglo-Saxon for throne-worthy.
So he kind of maneuvered
himself,
the scenes
to make himself
in front of the kid.
Yes.
How old was the kid at this time?
15.
Oh yeah. Well,
so
fuck that kid.
So there's
Edward he actually wrote a song about making that kid. He was like, Atheling, Atheling. All right, I'm sorry.
I don't know. That
anyway.
song.
So there are a few reasons.
Now I'm forgetting the actual name of the song. Glycerine.
Oh, okay.
Don't let them steal your throne, Atheling. Right.
So there are
all my references are from the 90s. Go on.
Sure.
So there are a few reasons to explain why Harold might have done what he done. The first is that Harold believed England needed a ruler who wasn't in their mid-teens. Right? He's in his early 40s. Yeah. This is not an unreasonable concern given the history of medieval boy kings. Medieval boy kings are terrible. Yeah. Every single one of them is bad.
What do you mean I get
absolute power?
Absolute power over everyone in this realm, even the girls?
Especially the girls?
Oh, God. Here we go again.
So second, it may have been an act of self-preservation, right? Edgar was an unknown quantity, right? Yeah. He had been able to manipulate is maybe too strong of a word for Edward, like what Harold had done to Edward, but like Harold had been comfortable as Edward's main ruler.
He was the man behind the throne.
Yeah, he was functionally prime minister. Like you can think of him in those terms. And Edgar is a teenager who might not like Harold.
I'd be like, fuck that kid.
Yeah,
and that kid would be like, fuck you, old man.
You're not my dad. And so what if he didn't end up favoring the Godwin family? Like, what if Edgar comes to the throne and is like, I don't like the Godwins, I want them to go.
He's like, and I'm working on my roar.
Yeah. And so finally, there may have been ambition, right? Harold had been wielding the powers of a king for a decade. Why not just wear the crown, right?
Yeah,
like, he's like, I can do the job, clearly. Like, he had been doing the job without the perks. Right. He wanted a promotion.
Right. It's true.
And so the Anglo-Saxon...
Is there a possibility, too, for, like, because especially an older, more mature person who's looking, like, understands the geopolitics of the time and stuff, do you think there might have even been a less selfish reason that, like, if we prop up this 15-year-old, we already know that there's probably going to be people coming for this throne.
Yeah, I mean, it's true.
We need somebody who can actually fight them off, as opposed to some
figurehead who could manipulate.
I think that's the original reason, that idea of not wanting to have a boy king.
Oh, okay.
Right? Like, the idea being that I think all of these things played a part in his mind all at the same time. I think there was the idea that he did have a sort of almost altruistic, public-spirited notion of like, I do not trust a 15-year-old to run my country. Right, and I know I can do it. But I also think there was a part of them as like, I think it'd be pretty rad if I was a king.
It's good to be the king.
And I also think that he was like, hey, he has a couple of brothers who are earls, right? He wants to make sure that his family's wealth and status is maintained. He's essentially the leader of his house. He goes, if I'm the king, myself and my brothers were set, right?
Because at this time, too, not it wouldn't be like snapping your fingers, but a king could essentially just dispossess you of everything.
Exactly.
On the whim of a king, could be like, well, that's all mine now.
Exactly.
And
so the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle will say of Harold, and the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is this document that they added to basically every single year, and it's written over a very long period of time, and sometimes the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle will say only like two things, and sometimes it will be very in-depth, but it will say of Harold Godwinson, of his reign, quote, "In that year, Harold was hallowed king, and he enjoyed a little quiet while he ruled the realm," end quote. So he is going to be dealing with crises from the get-go. This is true enough, for across the seas 2 men now stirred for war. The only one known to Harold was Duke William of Normandy, across the English Channel. Okay, so what did we learn? This is the end of, we're getting to the end of part 1. What did we learn? That religious do you want to give...
Well, my first, what I learned is that... unfortunately, Dr. History, Deity Scholar, doesn't like all of my voices. There's some that he's just not a big fan of, and I need to retire almost immediately.
They can't, you're batting, if it was a batting average, you're going into the Hall of Fame.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
nice.
You're well over 800.
Nice.
On batting average. But
I
didn't, oh, God damn it.
Yeah.
Steve Reich.
Foul ball. What do you think?
I don't know. I think
you learned nothing.
I learned absolutely nothing. I learned that. I think the monarchy's dumb. That's what I learned from.
I think that is you see
these like struggles for like succession are like the dumbest thing.
I 100% agree.
The most petty, dumb bullshit that like people fight over.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think, and I don't think that will ever not be a good lesson to learn when talking about kings and queens. is that this is stupid.
Yeah,
no, I agree with the spirit of what you said, but I will disagree that like at the time, because there wasn't a different system, like none of these guys are gonna be like, you know what, let's have a republic.
You know
what I mean? Like I can see it being, it's not a petty thing. Like literally, like the
I know
like,
from my like 21st century eyes.
Yeah.
Looking back,
but it's beautiful 21st century eyes, the kind of eyes you get lost in. Anyway,
well, and I mean, but to continue off of that, it is. I think that is helpful to know because again, one of the things, if I can get on my soapbox for just a moment, most
civics lesson.
When did you get off of it?
Yeah, you actually live on that soapbox.
We joke. Don't stop making fun of my God like that. He is my God King.
But for most of my life, the idea that there are people in the world right now who are like, hey, is like democracy and voting like a good idea?
Yep.
And to continually remind people like, no, it could be way worse, right? You could just have somebody in the dead of the night be like, oh yeah, no, the last king totally said that I'm the king now.
Promise, pinky swear.
Exactly. And yeah, I know he said it was like the choices are me or a 15-year-old, but like I did lie and break the law.
I mean, he also just had a stroke, so like
we don't even know.
But he said it, okay? But he might have had a stroke, but he said it, okay?
I have the recording right here.
See?
See, he said it, guys. Witness it. Witness.
So
I'm gonna eat your respect. What? What does that even mean?
So the religion. So what I pulled out as lessons learned is that religious observance and good leadership are not necessarily the same thing.
Okay.
Edward the Confessor is one of several English kings, others being Henry III and Henry VI. Who you can imagine may have found their way into the priesthood if they hadn't been next in line to be king, right? Like men who, if it hadn't been required that they become king, and none of these people have the concept of like abdication. Like it did not cross their minds to be like, well, I don't want to be king and I'll abdicate.
Well, and isn't the question too, if you say no, you're basically saying like the whole country is going to be chaos now, right? So it'd be less moral of you to do.
And there's also part of that. That's a really good point. And then there's also the fact that this is the divine right of kings. You've been chosen by God. And if you're an extremely religious person and you've been chosen by God, you go, I don't want to do this, but God said I have to. And I will be miserable the whole time.
Yep. Just like this podcast. God said I had to do it. And I believe Dr. History God Scholar.
Actually, you came up with the idea.
I came up with the idea. Actually,
Really?
You prayed for it. You prayed for it.
I remember texting you and telling you we should do this.
That we should have a podcast?
That we should have a podcast about history.
Okay.
Fair enough. Anyway,
We check receipts.
so also
I will, goddammit.
all right. So, and then the other
To be continued. This little debate.
the other lesson learned is that the motivations for why people take and hold power are myriad, and that simple explanations are normally hard to pin down. Right. So that idea that again, Harold can have more than one thought in his brain as he's taking the throne. Okay, and so that is the end of part one of
the
the
complex. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but I think being reminded of that is helpful.
Right.
So you want to?
Yeah.
This is why I worship him. It's the kind of thing you want from your God. You know what I mean?
Little fun thoughts, fun facts. That's been our show, Laughing Historically. If you want to follow us on social media, we have Instagram, Laughing Hist, Laughing HIST, as well as X, Twitter, whatever the fuck you call it these days, Laughing Hist. And also leave a comment, share, subscribe, and tell your friends about it, because we love this show.
We love it.
Want everybody else to love it.
Yeah,
so,
we absolutely love the show that was originally my idea.
And so it begins.
We're actually going to fight about this.
Yeah. We'll have a debate. We'll have a special episode.
Yeah.
Ask Dr. History Scholar a question on any of the social medias too. You can do that
please.
too.
He's waiting. He's been waiting.
Have you gotten a single question yet?
Zero
He shook his
questions.
head so sadly.
Yeah.
This is like great flood-worthy.
How we've been doing this for like a year and a half?
Almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years. So, yeah.
Almost 3.
And he has not gotten a question yet. So, it's his time.
Maybe we just
Please.
have really smart listeners.
Will, Zach, Paul, who else?
Ethel.
Red.
Which, Dan?
Edith. There's an Edith.
Is there an Edith in our?
Why will you keep doing my voice? I'm tired of him making fun of me.
If you do it enough times, it gets funny. That's what you learn in
laugh
college. I do, but I'm talking about Dr. History saying Commit to the bit. That's what I learned, actually.
Commit to the bit we learned on this episode, yeah.
Coonen's going to run a voice into the ground.
Nope. I'm retiring it right now because my deity is staring at me with angry eyes, and I can't. I'll make a new one.
He's going to electrocute you with his eyeballs.
Yeah. He's going to shoot lightning out of his fingers. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's our show. Thank you so
much.